in Fayetteville. You get a name for a street and then it changes. So if you get a street named after you, just hang on. It's not permanent. They're going to find somebody that they like better, and he's going to get the name later on. But changing names is what the Greeks did, or what the Romans did when they became the empire that was in charge. And about that time, there arose a commotion about the way. Now, actually, that's what it was called. You actually use the way 7 times in the book of Acts, talking about the way. And what the way was, here's the way Judaism was placed in Roman society. Judaism was a recognized religion by Rome. When people started getting saved on the day of Pentecost, they continued to worship in the synagogues and go to the temple, but then on the first day of the week, Sundays, they got together and they had some church. Well, they were considered by Rome to be a sect of Judaism. And within Judaism itself, they called that sect the Way. So you're part of the Way? Are you part of the Way? And they didn't become Christians until Acts 11:26, and the disciples were first called Christians at Antioch. But here they're called the Way. And in Acts 9:2, we find that Saul had asked letters from him to the synagogues of Damascus, so that if he found any who were of the Way, whether men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. So the Way was just considered a sect of Judaism. That's why the Jews felt liberty to persecute Christians, because what they were, as far as they were concerned, were disobedient Jews. And so they persecuted them. He called them together with the workers of similar occupation. This is Demetrius. Demetrius was a silversmith. He called them together with the workers of similar occupation and said, "Men, you know that we have our prosperity by this trade. Moreover," Demetrius adds, "you see and hear that not only at Ephesus, but throughout almost all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away many people, saying that they are not gods which are made with hands." So here's an interesting scenario. You've got these tradesmen who live in the city that is unique in the Roman Empire, where the big temple of Artemis / Diana resides. And Diana is the statue, I showed it to you, and it was also on coins at the time. She fell down from the sky, and this temple was dedicated to the goddess Diana. And so these silversmiths, they make statues, replicas of silver replicas or copper replicas or whatever of the temple itself. And this is big business. You've gone you go to Lookout Mountain, and they got the thing where you put the penny in and it puts the emblem on the penny, crushes the penny, makes you a keepsake. And when you go Israel, you can buy some trinkets in Israel. I mean, boy, you can buy a bunch of stuff. Because everybody's got the little menorahs, they've got all kinds of things that you can buy that says, "Here, when I was at Israel, you got on your shelf at home, I bought this, this is this, you give the history of it, then you show this." It's a great show and tell. When you go someplace, you come back and you want to, if you're poor, you just buy postcards. But you bring back things. Well, that's what people did. This was one of the 7 ancient world phenomenon, wonders of the world. So lots of tourists came to Ephesus. He says, Paul is preaching this message, which is bad for business. That this Paul has persuaded and turned away many people, saying that they are not gods which are made with hands. You can see their business was in jeopardy. It is a financial threat as far as they are concerned. Now, interestingly enough, Paul has been there preaching in that area for 2 years. Lots of people have gotten saved. Yet they're not out of business. But, again, he considers the business in jeopardy. He kind of just might have wakened one day and was just in a really, really bad mood. So not only is this trade of ours in danger of falling into disrepute, but also the temple of the great goddess Diana may be despised and her magnificence destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worship. So he's saying, which is it? Is it the financial jeopardy, or is it the religious jeopardy? Which is it? I suspect, just saying. I have a friend who used to say, it's not the money, it's the money. And here's what he meant by that. He meant almost everybody's principles have a financial price. And I used to say it because I thought it was funny. Then I began to realize, no, it's a lot of people. I'm leery to say most people, but many people, they stand firm on their principles until the price is just so overwhelming that, okay, I used to believe that, I don't believe it anymore. Well, here he's saying, yeah, there's this religious aspect, but there's this financial aspect. This will put us out of business, guys. We got to stand firm. So I'm going to say that I think it's more financial than religious, and it's not the money, but it is the money. Now, when they heard this, these other craftsmen, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." By the way, they did that for 2 hours. Great is Diana of the Ephesians. So the whole city of Ephesus was filled with confusion and rushed into the theater with one accord, having seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians, Paul's travel companions. So they took a couple of hostages and brought them into the arena. By the way, the ruins show that Colosseum, that arena there in Ephesus, was seated about 24,000 people. And it says the whole city was filled with confusion. So they got an angry crowd in the Colosseum who were upset with Paul, but Paul wasn't there, but they had taken a couple of people they'd seen with Paul, Gaius and Aristarchus, and they had them in tow in there in the Colosseum complaining about Paul. Now, you ever had a friend that just always gets you in trouble? Yeah? I in the Marine Corps, I had a friend named Mike. And Mike and I weren't compatible in any way. He was Roman Catholic. I was evangelical Christian. I was Independent Baptist at the time. Mike and I, we just weren't, but I just liked Mike. And Mike always had these crazy ideas. And I'd go along with the crazy ideas. There were actually 3 of us. I'm still Facebook friends with both of them. And Tom Davison. And so one night, Mike, it's after dark. It's like 8 or 9 o'clock. Mike says, "Let's go jogging." Well, that's kind of a crazy idea. We were at NAS Jax going in aviation electrician school there, and it's 10,000 sailors and about a detachment of 400 Marines who are in school there. So Marines and Navy people hated each other. In the absence of a real enemy, the Marines hated the sailors. And so you might just go out and, put yourself in jeopardy. Well, we went out jogging. As we were jogging, Mike looked on the ground, and there was a one-way sign that had fallen off a post. So Mike picked it up, and he's got it under his arm with the one-way, and we're jogging. And the MPs stop us. Sailors. And I'm thinking, why did I go jogging with Mike? That's not the worst situation they ever put me in, but this should have been a precursor. This should have been a hint. But so I'm thinking now we're going to spend the night in the brig because we stole a one-way. We didn't. It was on the ground. He had the hardest time convincing the guy we found on the ground. Tom said, yeah, he found on the ground. I said, yeah, he found on the ground. And they let us go. You ever have friends that just get you in trouble? You know what I mean? People that you really shouldn't be hanging with, but you do because they're so much fun, but in the process of hanging with them, you might end up doing something which you hadn't done. Maybe not end up in jail, but end up being really, really embarrassed. And when Paul wanted to go into the people, Paul says, this is my mess, I'm going to go clean it up. But it's a mob. The disciples wouldn't allow him to do it. Then some of the officials of Asia who were his friends, Paul had a lot of influence. As a matter of fact, we read in the last few verses that Paul's influence wasn't just Ephesus, it was Asia-wide. He actually made a big, big splash, evangelistic splash in Asia. And so Paul had friends in high places. Some of the officials of Asia who were his friends sent to him pleading that he would not venture into the theater because, Paul, it's hard to reason with a mob. It is impossible to reason with a mob because a mob doesn't want to be told anything. Some therefore cried one thing and some another, for the assembly was confused. And most of them did not know why they had even come together. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? We're furious. We're not sure why, but we're just furious. Give me some volume. More.
You working with a group, you got a UAW sign right now. Oh, Trump has accused me of whatever. No, I did not. Yeah, I'm union. Union is standing.
With the way things are, I think Trump is getting a lot of ground because he's
and it supports Bernie Sanders 120%.
Now he might have made a couple stops to the pub on the way, I'm thinking. But he was the most entertaining of the group. The what happened here? I lost my connection. So now the opportunistic Jews, they decided they want in on some Paul bashing. Because you know the Jews hated Paul. And now the whole city of Ephesus is up in arms against Paul, so they think they're going to add to Paul's woes. Now, isn't it interesting that they want to add to Paul's sorrows over this idol thing when their second commandment in Exodus chapter 20 verse 4 is, thou shalt never make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water or under the earth. That was their commandment. So what are they going to say when it's the silversmiths on one side wanting to make their idols, Paul on the other side saying, not a thing? And so why do they want to chime in except for the fact they're just hypocrites? They just want to try to seal Paul's doom. So they drew this guy named Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews putting him forward. And Alexander motioned with his hand and wanted to make his defense to the people. That word defense there is apologemai. The noun is apologia, which is the word for apologizing, but in theology it means to make a defense of your faith. So here he wants to make his defense to the people, which is really going to be an offense against Paul. But when they found out that he was a Jew, they had all they could stand of that. All with one voice they cried out for about 2 hours, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." They're just going at it. So number one, they don't all know why they're there exactly. They're all there for different reasons. They don't know exactly what the argument is, but they just know that they've been told that if they don't come, that somehow Diana in the temple, at Artemis temple, is going to be in jeopardy, maybe even destroyed. So they're just coming together, and what are they doing? They're just shouting out, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." Now that's 2 hours. That sounds familiar. Man, look at the crowd. Death to America. Now, you know what's interesting about that is I know you're thinking that this was recorded this past week. Actually, that was March 21st, 2015, right after we sent $500 million to Iran and let them go on building nukes. And that's the week following that, and they're still crying death to America. I heard one of the commentators say, "Oh, that's just what they say." Okay, I think they mean it. So, interesting thing, just kind of as an aside. I'd say it's an aside, except I actually put it in my notes, I guess. If I say it's an aside, I'm lying. I thought I would explain something that you may not realize. There are two kinds of Muslims, basically. There are probably 30 kinds of Muslims, basically two kinds. There are Sunni Muslims, Al-Qaeda, all of Saudi Arabia. Most of the Arab world are Sunnis. Indonesia, Sunnis. Then there's Shiites. Iran is the largest presence of Shiite Muslims. And the Shiites and the Sunnis absolutely, positively hate each other. I mean, I'm not saying just dislike like Presbyterians don't like Catholics. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Shiites and Sunnis want each other dead because they have a totally different view of what happened after Muhammad died, to the point to where it became a different religion altogether. So Shiites and Sunnis hate each other. When Saddam Hussein was the ruler over Iraq, he was ruling over a 60% Shiite and 40% Sunni nation. But he aligned with the Sunnis. So he kept the 60% intact, and he was constantly having wars, battles with Iran because they are Shiites, and he had a Shiite majority in his country. So he kept them in check. When we went in, and at the time we all thought it was a good idea that Saddam Hussein had to go, but when we went in and took Saddam out, and they gave a representative government, guess who got the power in Iraq? Shiites. And so not only that, but the force fighting the Shiites was the people that we came to know as Al-Qaeda. because they were Sunnis. So as Al-Qaeda and ISIS, also Sunnis, were destroyed, it just increased the Shiite presence in the area, and now Iran has tremendous influence over Iraq, to the point to where the Sunnis have now diminished to a minority of about 33% or so, and the rest are Shiites. So what we're looking at in Iraq is not a nation that's controlled by a Sunni ruler anymore, but by a Shiite government where the Sunnis they're diminishing rapidly out of the nation, and the government is aligning with Iran. So when we'll probably be kicked out of Iraq this week. I think they've got a meeting today, and I think they will decide to kick us out of Iraq. And it could be worse. There's Saudi Arabia's right there, Kuwait's there. It's not like we lose our presence there. But it was Iran that supported the Assad regime in Syria, and so he aligned himself with Shiites as well. So the fact that we stirred the hornet's nest this past week was a hornet's nest that was going to get stirred at some point anyway, and we're just going to watch our backs, because little old death to America there, that's the Khomeini, the ruler. He will do what he can, but he can't do much. It's a nation of 41 million. We have 300 million. And when the city clerk had quieted the crowd, he said, "Men of Ephesus, what man is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is temple guardian of the great goddess Diana, and of the image which fell down from Zeus? Therefore, since these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rashly." So here's the clerk, after 2 hours of them shouting, finally gets an opportunity to speak, and he says, look here, guys, don't do anything rashly. The Romans had an organized court system, and he knows what he's talking about. They'll round you up and they'll put you in jail if you do things that are against the Roman law. "For you have brought these men here who are neither robbers of temples nor blasphemers of your goddess." Paul did teach that the unseen God is represented by Jesus Christ, the only body that God ever had on earth. He taught all of that. But he wasn't going around dissing the gods, dissing the tradesmen that were making the god. I mean, it was tourist ornaments that people were taking back with them. Paul was not attacking that. Now, Romans were very, very cautious about convictions. As a matter of fact, in Acts chapter 22, when one of the guards is going to question Paul by scourging, and finds out that he's a Roman citizen, he says, "Ooh, okay. If you were just Jewish like I thought you were, I could beat you half inch of your life. But since you're a Roman citizen, can't do it." So there were some laws in place. Now, it's interesting, Paul's not accustomed to being found innocent. Everywhere he goes, he's been found guilty. Well, not here. "Therefore, if Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen have a case against anyone, the courts are open and there are proconsuls. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you have any other inquiry to make, it should be made in the lawful assembly." See that word assembly right there? Now, if I ask what's the Greek word for church, many of you would know that because I warned that out. Ecclesia. And there it is spelled out on the screen, ecclesia. So the Greek word for church is ecclesia. But ecclesia was already a word already in use before the church began on the day of Pentecost. And the word ecclesia means an assembly that's called out for a specific purpose. Well, that certainly defines the church, but it also defines this mob. And I'll show it to you. It's used 3 times in this passage. Ecclesia. "For we are in danger of being called in question for today's uproar. Therefore, being no reason which we may give to account for this disorderly gathering. And when he had said these things, he dismissed the church. Actually, the assembly, the ecclesia. You know, this story has a happy ending. Paul doesn't usually get happy endings. Sometimes he does, but not usually. But at this point, Paul realizes it might be time to head on to Jerusalem, because he said, I want to go to Jerusalem, and then I want to go to Rome. And so this was like the opportunity that God gave to Paul to say, yeah, I think I'm about done here, because these people want to string him up. But he made a tremendous impact on the area. Now, so what's the lesson here? Well, to me, the lesson screams out, make certain your principles can't be bought. I used to think the saying, it's not the money, I even included that in Bible tracts somewhere along the way. I used to think it's not the money, it's the money was funny. But then when I realized that it's not the money, it's the money, literally means that people will sell their principles for a price, then it's not so funny to me anymore. If you have principles, and I know you do, don't compromise those principles because of circumstances or because of money or because of me. Stick to your principles. Now, some people have preferences which they call principles. When I was in RAs at my church in Louisville, Kentucky, I think it's 11 years old, and I didn't know this, but the church fathers, whoever they were, they'd had meetings, and they were actually having some pretty animated meetings over whether to compromise the principles of the church and put a Coke machine in the fellowship hall. Now, I know that seems funny to us right now, but they were dead serious, because they likened it to the Jesus turning the money changers' tables over. Now, the church is not the temple, by the way. Our bodies are the temple. But it was pretty serious doings with them, and there were these people that were adamantly, the old timers, people like us, were just adamant. No, you must not sell things in the church. It's not what the church is for. Now, they were sincere, and they were adamant, and they were unbending. But our Constitution bylaws said we can vote on it, and it said that anybody that's been baptized, joined the church, don't care how old you are, you can vote. And so one night we showed up for RAs, and the GAs, girls, and they said, boys, we're going to big church tonight. They got a business meeting. And we're going to decide whether to have a Coke machine. You want a Coke machine, don't you? Well, yeah. Who doesn't want a Coke machine? Well, yeah, of course I want a Coke machine. And so the it's so vivid in my memory now. We march in after the church service has started. They're still singing, and we march in, and the GAs march in, and there's 2 rows of RAs and 2 rows of GAs. There's about 40 of us. And when it came time to vote, it was hands down, we won. And none of us knew the serious nature of the discussion. None of us knew that. Nobody briefed us that this was controversial. We're just wondering why they need us to vote in the Coke machine. Sure, who wouldn't want a Coke machine? And we carried it. Now, people cried foul. I get it. And to them, the church's principles had been compromised by the Coke machine. Now, I say that to say this. When you're determining your principles, stay away from the petty. I mean, really.
Right.
Stay away from the petty. Make sure I'll never deny that Jesus Christ is Lord. I'll never deny that Jesus Christ was God in the flesh. I'll never deny the integrity of the Word of God, that it's the inspired Word of God. Now, whether I wear a tie when I preach, I decided not to do that anymore. Yeah, I thought that was a principle. Well, if I ever said it was a principle, I lied to you, because it's not really a principle. I never said it was a principle, but if you think I did, then you're mistaken. It's not a principle. Here's the problem. A lot of people establish their principles based on things that really shouldn't fall into that category. Your principles of life is an awesome thing. It's a trust. It's a responsibility. Don't throw petty things into that box of principles. Stick with the important things. And never, 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 never sell out on your principles. Let's stand, please.